TV manufacturers are now putting 144Hz and 165Hz labels on more gaming televisions, which makes a standard 120Hz model sound outdated before you have even connected your console. The problem is that PlayStation 5 does not output games at 144 or 165Hz, so the larger number may not improve your gaming experience in the way the marketing suggests. There is still one situation where buying a 165Hz TV for PS5 can make sense, but it has much more to do with the complete television than those additional 45 refreshes. Refresh rate describes how many times a display can update its image every second, while frame rate describes how many new frames the console is actually producing. A 165Hz panel is capable of displaying up to 165 unique frames per second, but only when the connected device sends that many frames. If your PS5 game is running at 60 FPS, the television receives 60 unique frames, and if the game supports 120 FPS, it receives up to 120. The panel cannot reveal 165 different gameplay frames when the console never sends them. Sony officially lists 4K output at up to 120Hz for PS5, while compatible PS5 Pro games can also run at up to 120 FPS. Neither console provides a native 144Hz or 165Hz gaming output, which means a television with a 165Hz panel will normally use a compatible 120Hz mode when connected to a PS5. This does not create a compatibility problem, because a 165Hz television can usually accept lower refresh rates such as 60 and 120Hz. It simply means that the additional capability remains unused by the console. You are not receiving smoother 165 FPS gameplay, lower latency from 165 unique frames, or more motion information than you would receive on a properly designed 120Hz display. The numbers make the difference easier to understand. At 60 Hz, a new refresh begins approximately every 16.7 milliseconds, while at 120 Hz, that interval falls to around 8.3 milliseconds. Moving from 120 to 165 Hz reduces it again to approximately 6.1 milliseconds, so the improvement from 60 to 120 Hz is more than 8 milliseconds per refresh, while the theoretical improvement from 120 to 165 Hz is only a little over 2 milliseconds. Even that smaller advantage only exists when the gaming device is actually producing more than 120 frames per second. Since PS5 stops at 120 Hz, it cannot provide the television with the additional frames needed to use the 165 Hz maximum. This is why the jump from a 60 Hz TV to a 120 Hz TV can meaningfully change PS5 gaming, while the jump from 120 to 165 Hz normally does not. A native 120Hz display gives PS5 players access to the console's highest supported refresh rate output in compatible games. Fast shooters, racing games, fighting games, and other performance-focused titles can feel smoother and more responsive when they offer a 120 FPS mode, although developers may reduce resolution, ray tracing, or graphical detail to reach that higher target. A 165Hz panel does not remove those compromises because they are created by the console's performance limits rather than the television. If a game must lower its resolution to maintain 120 FPS, connecting the PS5 to a 165Hz display will not restore the missing detail or allow the console to generate 45 additional frames. This is where buyers can easily confuse panel capability with complete television quality. A 165Hz TV may still look noticeably better than a particular 120Hz model, but the improvement could come from higher HDR brightness, deeper black levels, better local dimming, stronger color performance, faster pixel response, or lower input lag. In that situation, the faster television may be worth buying, although the PS5 is benefiting from the TV's other strengths rather than its maximum refresh rate. Variable refresh rate is also more important for PS5 than the difference between 120 and 165 Hz. VRR allows a compatible display to synchronize its refresh timing with the console's changing frame rate, helping reduce tearing and improve the appearance of performance fluctuations. Sony supports VRR through compatible HDMI 2.1 televisions and monitors, although the final result depends on the display and the game being played. A responsive 120Hz television with properly functioning VRR can therefore provide a smoother experience than a poorly optimized 165Hz model with weak processing or inconsistent gaming performance. The highest refresh rate number does not automatically guarantee the lowest input lag, the fastest pixel response, or the cleanest motion. Another valuable benefit of a 120Hz display is its ability to present compatible 40 FPS game modes evenly. Because 120 divides cleanly by 40, every game frame can remain on screen for 3 refresh cycles, producing consistent frame pacing. This creates a useful middle ground between a detailed 30 FPS quality mode and a smoother 60 FPS performance mode, allowing some games to preserve more visual quality while still feeling noticeably more responsive than 30 FPS. Once again, a 165Hz panel does not improve this particular PS5 feature, because the television can simply switch to a compatible 120Hz timing for the 40 FPS mode. Native 120Hz is already enough to provide the flexibility the console needs. If you are comparing gaming TVs for PS5, I have linked several recommended 120Hz and 165Hz models in the description below, where you can check today's prices, availability, and buyer reviews. Discounts change frequently, and sometimes a 165Hz television becomes the better purchase because its complete picture quality package is stronger or because its price has fallen close to a comparable 120Hz model. PC gaming is the clearest reason to consider 165Hz, even when your main console is a PS5. A sufficiently powerful gaming computer can produce more than 120 frames per second in competitive titles, allowing the television to display additional frames that the PlayStation cannot provide. In that mixed setup, the PS5 can operate at up to 120 Hz, while the computer can potentially use the full 144 or 165 Hz capability. The improvement from 120 to 165 Hz on PC is still smaller than the jump from 60 to 120 Hz, but it can be noticeable during fast competitive games when the computer maintains frame rates above 120 FPS. Mouse movement may feel slightly more immediate, camera turns can look cleaner, and tracking moving players may become easier, particularly when you sit close to the display. You must still verify what the television supports at its maximum refresh rate. Some models provide native 4K at 144 or 165 Hz, while others advertise extremely high gaming rates that only become available after reducing the resolution to 1440p or 1080p. A large number, such as 240 Hz or 288 Hz, may refer to a special accelerator mode rather than native 4K performance. For PS5, the practical specifications to prioritize are native 120Hz support, 4K at 120Hz input, VRR, auto low latency mode, low input lag, fast response time, and strong picture quality. The number of full bandwidth HDMI ports can also matter when you plan to connect multiple consoles, a gaming PC, and an eARC sound system. You should also avoid confusing a genuine high refresh panel with motion smoothing terminology. A television advertised with a branded motion number may still use a native 60Hz panel, and artificial frame interpolation does not allow it to accept a real 4K 120 FPS PS5 signal. The product specifications should explicitly state native 120 Hz, 144 Hz, or 165 Hz support and identify which resolutions are available at those rates. For someone buying a television exclusively for PS5, there is little reason to pay significantly more just to move from 120 to 165 Hz. The console cannot use the additional refresh rate headroom, and the money may provide a more visible improvement when spent on better local dimming, stronger HDR brightness, a larger screen, or superior contrast. If the 165Hz model also delivers better picture quality and costs only slightly more, then it can still be the smarter television. You are buying the better complete product while gaining useful flexibility for a future gaming PC, even though the PS5 itself will remain limited to 120 Hz. A good example would be choosing between a basic 120 Hz television with weak HDR and a brighter 165 Hz mini LED model with advanced local dimming. The mini LED television may produce more impactful games, deeper dark scenes, and better daytime visibility, but those improvements would still appear when the PS5 is running at 60 or 120 Hz. The 165 Hz label is not the main reason the picture looks better. The opposite can also be true. A premium 120 Hz OLED with perfect black levels, extremely fast pixel response, and excellent gaming performance may provide a more impressive PS5 experience than a cheaper 165 Hz LCD television. Choosing the LCD purely because 165 is larger than 120 would ignore the features you will notice in every game. Future-proofing may sound like another reason to choose 165 Hz, but it should be treated carefully. A faster panel provides more flexibility for computers and future devices, yet buying decisions should be based primarily on hardware you actually expect to connect. There is little value in sacrificing contrast, HDR, or screen size today for a refresh rate that your current console cannot use. So, is a 165 Hz TV worth it for PS5? If you are paying extra specifically because you expect smoother PS5 gaming than a native 120 Hz television can provide, the answer is no. Both the standard PS5 and PS5 Pro operate at up to 120 Hz, so a capable 120 Hz TV already supports the console's highest current refresh rate output. A 165 Hz TV becomes worth considering when it is also the better television, when the price difference is small, or when you plan to connect a gaming PC capable of producing more than 120 frames per second. For PS5 alone, however, picture quality, VRR performance, response time, input lag, and HDMI connectivity matter far more than the difference between 120 and 165 Hz. Before making your decision, compare today's prices, availability, and buyer reviews using the links in the description below. Let me know in the comments whether you would pay extra for a 165 Hz television even though the PS5 stops at 120 Hz, or whether you would spend that money on better picture quality instead.